This video is for all women in music. It's for the queer community, the BIPOC community, people with disabilities, anybody who's been discriminated against in the music community. This video is also for all the boys in music. Whether you're a rich old white dude who runs a record label, or if you're a teenage boy starting your first ever band. And finally, this video is for everyone who listens to music. Everyone. I remember when I first started playing gigs about 4 years ago now, I think. For some reason, an interview or something, I was asked the question, what's it like to be a woman in music? And at that time I didn't have any complaints. Nothing bad had happened to me, so I only had positive things to say. But I was stumped by the question, because I knew just the fact that the question existed meant that there was supposed to be something wrong. That being a woman in music was different and unusual, and as a result, things weren't going to be ideal. As a new musician, I hadn't really noticed any problems in my music community, but that's because a lot of the problems are really subtle, and it's only after time that you start to see the patterns. Most of my examples are going to come from the live music scene. That's probably because it's a lot harder for me to tell if stuff like my emails are being ignored because I've got a female name, if my proposals are being turned down more often than my male counterparts. Here are some of the patterns I've noticed in my experience playing in the Melbourne music scene. Things that stand out to me are all the boys in bands playing shirtless, and women being told that we're dressing up too much when we wear a little crop top or skirt. It's guys from other bands hitting on my friends in the crowd and then coming up to me later once they've realised that I'm a musician and apologising. As if there's two different types of women. Women who are fair game and women who are associated with musicians and therefore need to be treated like real people. I think about one time where a guy came up to me after a gig from a much more successful band than mine and offered me a support slot. So I added him on Facebook, and then he messaged me obsessively for the next 3 days trying to get me to go out with him. And what do you know, the support slot didn't exist. I think about all the times that my bands are offered great opportunities. And we deserve them, we really do. But every time it happens, I can't help wondering if we're only being offered the opportunity because the man in charge wants something else. A lot of this comes from the way that the men in charge treat us, but a lot of it, I think, just sticks in our mind from other bands who might get jealous, and then they say, oh, they only got those opportunities because they're girls. Like, that's not true. We get opportunities because we're hardworking musicians. Hardworking musicians who do get treated like objects. I remember gigs I've played where I've been the only woman on stage, and the crowd, filled mostly of guys from the other bands, start whooping and catcalling from the crowd. My experience includes far too many times of being the opening band when we deserve a later slot. I've had bookers justify this to me because we're not as heavy as the other bands, which literally just comes down to the fact that my voice is higher pitched than some guys out there. Compared to men in music, I feel like we're given unsolicited advice all the time. It's this incessant doubt, as if we are women and therefore not real musicians, that kind of chips away at you as you go. There also seems to be this real trend that to be a successful female musician, you have to fit into one of two categories. You have to be hot for the male gaze, or you have to be masculine yourself so that the boys can fit you into the bro culture. It really does feel like music is still a man's world, with an increasing number of women in it, thankfully, but the men still control it. They control the expectations, and they kind of dictate where us little women can fit into their scene. And one thing that's really irritating in the music scene is the idea that a girl band or a female-fronted band is a genre. It gets treated that way. You see, a lot of the time, there is a specified spot on a lineup for a woman. There is that tokenistic one slot, tick the box, we have women on the lineup. And as such, a lot of the time, it's like we're pitted against each other. We're made to compete against and diss other women in music because we're made to feel like girl band is a genre and there's only one spot available to us. And maybe the reason we are so rare is because there is only that 1 in 3 spot, if that, for a woman in music. It took me so long to even pick up music because I just didn't have any female idols. I was a huge emo teen growing up, and while there definitely are some women in heavier music, the bubble that I was into was completely male-centric. Not just the front person, but the entire band were dudes. Not that there's anything wrong with other parts of the music industry, but I found myself doing everything from photography to managing to hand-sewing merch, when really I just wanted to be a musician myself. The fact that women in music are still a minority might mean that other teenagers are still feeling the same. The past 5 years or so has definitely demonstrated a shift in equal representation of all sorts of marginalised people in the music community, but the problem is not fixed. It is far from fixed. And so I asked a bunch of non-male musicians I know the same question that was pitched to me 4 years ago. I asked them, what are your experiences as a female or a non-male in the music industry? Some of my friends replied that they were lucky not to have any horror stories. The fact that you have to be lucky as a woman to not have any horror stories really says something about the scene without saying anything at all. All of the other responses kind of fit into 3 categories. The first being that we are constantly doubted as musicians. The second being that we're constantly objectified as sexual objects or mere women. And the third, just the sense that something was not quite right. And it can be hard to pin down. So I want to share with you a bunch of these responses. The music industry doubting women looks like the tone of surprise you get when in conversation you mention that you play an instrument. It looks like the guys in the other bands only introducing themselves and talking to the guys in your band and completely ignoring you, as if you're not there. It's someone filling in with a pretty iconic band, only to see a Facebook comment on the footage later on accusing her of miming the songs. It's the sound people only addressing the guys in the band as if they know more, and mansplaining our own equipment to us. It's fiddling with our amp settings, our pedal settings, telling us which drum is which. I had a friend recount an incident where the sound person actually hopped on stage, changed her amp settings, and when she told him, no, the gain that high will make my pedals feedback, he was like, no, trust me, this is what you want. He jumped off the stage, she turned on her pedals, and sure enough, feedback everywhere. But of course, she was the one left on stage, looking like she had no idea how to use her equipment, and she had to say sorry into the microphone, apologising for a man's mistake. Another friend shared a time when a guy from another band asked her male bandmate which keyboard she used, and she was standing right there. It's being the only band with women in it in the entire lineup, and watching the whole crowd disappear into smokers as you're setting up. It kind of feels like a lot of the time male punters don't even give women a chance. They see us and just go, nah, I like good music. Rock. It's people not taking you seriously in a business role and waiting for the men in the company to make the decisions. Ideas like, she's great at her job, but I'd prefer you to do it. It's men standing over you as you pack down after a gig, offering you assistance that you don't need and that they definitely wouldn't be offering to your male bandmates. It's at the same time, they look at you a little bit too closely, sexualizing you, and disregarding you as a legitimate musician. This leads into the objectification comments. It's you and your bandmates setting up and overhearing the dudes at the pool table saying that they don't really care how you sound. They're going to stick around just to watch. It's not only disrespectful to any effort that we put into learning our instruments and writing songs, it also just kind of makes us feel a bit icky for wanting to look nice. It's the fact that for some reason there's a very fine line between being supportive and being gross. It's the old rock dudes that stick around to watch and they'll cheer, they'll tell you did a good job, they might buy you music, and then they feel entitled to giving you a sloppy kiss on the cheek. Not really a problem that men face so much. It's being pitted against each other based on our perceived gender, when in reality we probably actually are completely different bands. But any of that uniqueness is overlooked. It's just music woman. The list of stuff that's not quite right is a lot longer. And this is stuff which can be a lot harder to talk about. It can seem like you're being really nitpicky or bitchy just for bringing these things up, that they're insignificant. But this is the foundation of the culture that is discriminating against us. These tiny things stack up to make each experience just a little bit less comfortable. A friend of mine put it that the gig scene is full of men who are not blatantly sexist, but sexist by virtue of existing uncritically in a space dominated by men. Why is your band men only? Why do you consume music only by men? Why do you speak to my male bandmates and not to me? It's the assumption that a woman will be the lead singer of the band, supported by a bunch of men playing the real instruments. It's being othered into being the star, the token, the rock chick. It's when your Uber driver can't accept the fact that you're part of the band as a whole, and instead has to make a big deal about you being the star instead, like you don't fit in to a band. You're always going to be separate. It's women, gender non-conforming, queer, trans, BIPOC folks, and people living with a disability being treated like a pawn in the industry, where people rely on them saying yes to their opportunities just so they can show off how socially conscious they are. It kind of seems like being accepted and embraced by the industry is still gatekept by those people in power. Representation has become largely performative, where if you make the big bosses feel like they're good people, if you're cool enough, rich enough, if you got the surgery, if you're white passing, if you submit to the male gaze, if you're easy to stomach, then you're in. But if you make the people in the industry question and examine themselves, then you're out. It makes being in the music industry a choice between biting your tongue and getting success, but maybe hating yourself in the process, or watching others succeed around you while you stick to your values. Fighting this cis-white patriarchal cookie-cutter music industry is really tough. It's definitely a huge barrier to the music scene at the moment, and like one of my friends described it, it's not fair or conducive to the arts industry if only the strong can survive. It's not quite right when you're called a bitch just for asking for the bare minimum in terms of representation. Having people attack you when you stand up for yourself is just disappointing in what's supposed to be a welcoming industry. As a performer, having to explain to the venues and the bookers that having an all-male lineup isn't okay? Why does the burden have to fall on us? Sure, that has improved lately. It seems like the majority of the industry now knows that it's not okay to have only dudes on a lineup. But all of the ideas and assumptions that are underpinning the inequality in our music scene are still there. They're the reasons that the lineups became so male-centric in the first place. And while we fixed the lineups, perhaps, the attitudes towards women in the industry are still there. It's all of the things that have been shared in this video so far, and now we have to come together to challenge them. I was really overwhelmed by all of these responses I got from the people I reached out to. Obviously, a lot of them were sad to hear, but I once again felt a really strong community of women just in the Melbourne music scene, just that I've known from the past couple of years. And that's because it obviously has to be said that it is not all negative. If it was, we wouldn't still be here doing it. There's lots of positives, and so I want to share some of them as well. There is a really good amount of space held for women in the music industry now, and it feels powerful as female identifying folks to be able to take up space that was once reserved for men. And strangely, knowing that other women are experiencing these acts of sexism too is weirdly comforting and bonding. It gives us the purpose to push on because we know that we're not alone. There is now a sense that people are listening more. They're starting to hear our voices. Women are being encouraged to move to the front of the music scene. To a lot of us, it does feel like women and GNC folks are leading this push in the industry for greater representation. Despite being pitted against each other, it's kind of like we have an unspoken code to support each other. And it's worth it, because being on stage and performing is the best feeling in the world. Now, this video isn't intended to be negative. In Melbourne, we haven't had gigs for 7 months. In that time, a lot has happened in the world, and a lot of really important conversations have been opened up. I feel like a lot of us are growing a stronger sense of community awareness. awareness. And if we can bring this awareness with us into whatever new world of live music we open up soon, I'm sure we can make it a much more welcoming and inclusive space. Here is a list of small and large things we can do to make sure that happens. It is up to all of us to make sure music is a space where everyone feels like they belong. And we can do this from the ground up. When you're forming your first ever band, maybe look outside of your immediate bubble. Sure, maybe the only people you know who know how to play instruments are guys. There are women out there, and you may have to go to a little bit more effort to find them, but it is worth it. When you're booking gigs, maybe book multiple girl bands on your lineup, and I dare you, describe them as something other than a girl band. What do they actually sound like? How would you describe them if it was an all-male band? Punters and other band members make extra effort to stick around and watch women play. I don't care if you don't know them. Maybe they don't know anybody there and they're just trying to break into the scene for the first time. Stick around and surprise, surprise, you might actually love their music. Check your behaviour and your bandmates' behaviour towards women at gigs and in the wider world. When you see a woman with an instrument, notice her playing, not how she looks. A great rule of thumb is don't ask a non-male musician a question that you wouldn't be comfortable asking a male musician. You're there for the music, nothing else. Just treat them as a musician. Definitely advocate for minorities, but act according to your advocacy as well. An Instagram post is one thing, but continuous inclusive behaviour is what actually makes change. All of us are going through a very steep learning curve with this, and it's okay to make mistakes sometimes, but as long as you're genuinely doing your best to make gigs a welcoming and accessible space for everybody, then you're on the right path. Look objectively at your lineups and see who they're representing and who you're missing. Check out the venues and make the information publicly available as to how accessible they are. Practice what you preach every single day. You can't just fill the quota for a month and then forget about minorities. Straight up, just don't accept sexist behaviour. Point it out. Make an effort to go and say hi and introduce yourself to the women who are on stage. Ask her about her equipment, and definitely ask her before you dare ever touch her equipment. Add non-male music to your playlists. All of your playlists. Literally, every single Spotify playlist you ever make sure there is at least one non-male, at least 5 non-males in every playlist. There's no shortage. We live in an abundance of music. There's no excuse for exclusively male playlists. And then, every time that you're listening to music or you're sharing music with your friends, in the tiniest of ways, women are benefiting from all their hard work too. And encourage girls and young women to pursue music. Maybe you've got young cousins, nieces, nephews, neighbours. If you find yourself ever supporting boys in music, make sure you're also supporting girls in music. The list could actually be infinite. There are so many steps we can take to make sure music is inclusive for women and for any other minority groups. I don't want this video to go forever, so please include your suggestions in the comments below and let's keep building each other up. If you've got any other experiences you'd like to share as well, I'd love to hear them too. I think a lot of the time people don't notice this is happening, and so we need to talk about it to be able to learn from it and grow. I personally love the music world in Melbourne, and I don't think I'll ever leave it. Over the years, it has most of the time made me feel so strong and powerful, creative, seen, appreciated. Music is so powerful, and building a strong community around it is extremely important. And we have that community. We just have to take care of it.